All of the things that happen on Christmas Eve have become so commonplace, at least in our minds, that they don't surprise us any longer. A man and his expectant wife travel to a small town because the government tells them to. Sure, happens all the time. They can't find a room to stay in, so they put up with the animals. Now, I don't have any animals like that in my house, but I guess if I was on a farm, I might at least have them nearby. Shepherds nearby get visited by some angels with an incredible announcement. Hey, that happened to me last week, didn't it? Do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all people. Yeah, naturally, they were afraid. In spite of our overfamiliarity with the story, these things do not happen all the time. At least if we're honest, this is unique. Because of that, being a storyteller with an event as unique and even as irrational as this one, I wonder what the shepherds themselves might have thought about the next morning. As one of them sat up and looked around that morning after, he was still dazed from the events from the night before. After all, he hadn't gotten a good night's sleep. He was taking care of his family's flock and had joined other shepherds. They did that. They bring all their small flocks together, and there's no way of getting them mixed up. The sheep know their master's voice. Everything was as it should be. The sheep were still safely in their cave where they had put them the night before, the cave they used as a sheepfold when they grazed near that village. It's always important to keep them safe, but with all the strangers and foreigners who might be traveling around for the census, let's be a little extra cautious. As he sat there early in the morning, he began to recall the details. They had just settled in the night before. The sheep were safe and down for the night, which usually takes a while. The group of them, the shepherds, were sitting around talking, eating. He himself had pulled out one of his instruments. He had a flute. They used that to both pass the time, entertain themselves, and to calm the sheep. That's when the angel appeared. At least that's what they decided it was. It was a messenger. It was a messenger from God. They were told that a baby was born in the nearby village. They knew at that moment that for some reason or another, this was a special invitation to them. Angels just don't go around announcing the birth of any old baby. It was the long-awaited Messiah, the Savior. Because somebody had to stay with the sheep in the cave and protect them, the rest decided that they would go to town. They had what they needed. They had their rod. The rod that's about 3 foot long, a good solid piece of wood, strong, used for protection and used to prod the sheep once in a while. They had their shepherd staffs. About 6 foot tall. It was both kind of a walking stick and also a prod. It could be used as a weapon if you needed to as well. The walking stick was important. Things were not even in that part, and there's a lot of stones and rocks you could fall over. They also were tired. It had been a long day. The sheep were completely dependent on the shepherds. The flock needed the shepherds to lead them to clear, safe waters and to wide open pastures. Every few hours, they would have to stop and count the sheep and then recount them again. To lose a sheep was a disaster. They had to be sure none were lost. Instead of resting, here they were heading into town to find a baby wrapped up and lying in, of all things, a feeding trough. That's what probably caught their attention, as if angels from heaven aren't enough. If this baby was to be a savior, what was he doing there? What was he doing in their area? Bethlehem was not a big, wealthy place. It was a backwater, a village of maybe 200 people at the most. Why was this then being announced to them there? Shepherds, among the poorest and lowest of people in the social classes. And again, there's that manger. Who would put a savior in a feeding trough? It didn't matter, of course. When God sends a whole host of angels to sing to you, you go. And not surprisingly, they found everything just as they had been told. There were the parents and the baby. They were in the lower level of a house. That's where the animals were kept. The parents sat there while the rest of the family and others were up in the upper levels of the house. The parents smiled as the shepherds told them the story. As they recalled the angel's words and that wonderful moment, the parents said, okay, yeah. The father shook his head in wonderment. The mother smiled and nodded a quiet, thank you for coming. It seemed to please the parents that they had been there. The parents seemed to be nodding off. The baby was asleep. So the shepherds slipped out quietly. As they returned to the fields, they talked about what they had seen, and yet they were still as bewildered as ever about it. There were still more questions than there were answers, as I assume there would be for any of us in such a situation. Even the next morning, sitting with their morning meal, ready to lead their sheep to green pastures for the day, the world around them still looked the same. Yet in their hearts, they knew it wasn't. Finally, one of them stopped, looked at the others and smiled and said, I think I've just figured it out. As the youngest of the group, he was kind of proud of himself. Won't those rulers and kings in Jerusalem be surprised when they find out that the one coming from God is not with them, but with us? They all chuckled and got ready to lead the sheep for another day. That was as close as they could get to describing what had happened. Today, we know that the little baby they had helped welcome into the world was God's son. Even more than that little baby was God's own word, come alive to save the people. He was, we believe to this day, God wrapped up in human clothes. God is with us now. To the shepherds, it was an amazing mystery. For some reason, at that moment of grace coming alive in the lowliest of places, they had been invited to share it. Were they the first to know this? What other things might still happen? They remembered the tired but peace-filled look on the mother's face. She knew this was a moment unlike any other. We also know that that's not even the half of it. In fact, the rest of the story will make this angelic visit seem like exactly what it is. A brief opening act of something far greater. Out of love, amazing love for us, for all humanity, God has become a human being. May it never cease to amaze us. Merry Christmas.